At special Thanksgiving service in Abuja, Vice President Osinbajo ascribes success of 2019 elections to God.
I want to thank the Almighty God for exaltation. I want to thank Him also for exaltation for all of us who are here.
No fresh elections in Rivers State. Independent National Electoral Commission declares.
This is a new slate and we're going to start again. And when I say start again, we're going to do it openly. You're all going to be there.
Acting Inspector General of Police promises to revitalize community policing to check crimes.
And on Good Morning Nigeria this Monday, we shall examine budget templates and priority spending of the 3 tiers of government.
All right, the 2019 general elections are gradually winding down as winners at all levels receive their certificates of return ahead of their swearing in on the 29th of May for governors and sometime in June for lawmakers. Attention is therefore shifting to the business of governance.
Indeed, Kingsley, if the push and shove witnessed during the just concluded elections were about service, then Nigerians must be in for good times as those elected get set to deliver on their promises.
Exactly, Kirian. But then this brings in the question of how public resources are allocated and utilized. Simply put, what is behind the budget template of governments at the federal, state, and local government levels? And how does that template respond to the yearnings of the electorate?
Now, it's no news that the electorate appear to be very important during elections, as we witnessed in the just concluded elections. But when it comes to budgeting and spending, they simply disappear from the scene.
Perhaps that is why there appears also to be a lack of proper application of budgets to target issues that are very dear to the electorate. And the result is before all of us, as basic services such as education, health, power, infrastructure, and jobs, and much more continue to be elusive.
And that is why we want to focus on the issue of budgeting templates and priority of governments as we look towards the takeoff of new administrations in the coming month.
Now, essentially, we shall be asking, among other questions, how resources are allocated during the budgeting cycles, such as the ones that are being passed or defended at the state and federal levels at the moment. Now, do the governments at all tiers devote more monies where the people's needs are, or do they focus on funding the so-called bloated bureaucracies that take a chunk of the public purse?
Well, tough questions, I must say, Kingsley, because we are hoping that guests who are experts in budgeting and government spending will provide the answers. Thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria for today. I am Kirian Umayo.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian in also welcoming you to this edition of the program, as always broadcast live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. We are right here at the Abuja headquarters studios, and of course we'll have our complimentary parts of the program brought to you later on, and these include newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and entertainment. And just before we take the morning news right now with Najatu Tijani, do not forget, today is the 1st of April 2019. We had played a prank earlier before we came on air. And so just be careful, Kieran.
We played a prank, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out.
It worked. Najatu, let's have the morning news with you.
Thank you, Kingsley. Good morning. Here is the morning news. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has described the successful conduct of the 2019 polls as well as the preservation of the lives of Nigerians to God. This was at a special service of Thanksgiving organized by the Aso Villa Chapel in Abuja. Correspondent Jide Onifade was at the conference center of the State House, venue of the program.
All of the exaltation comes from God. God is the judge. He puts down one and he exalts another. I want to thank the Almighty God for exaltation. I want to thank him also for exaltation for all of us who are here and who are believing God, and those who are believing God for exaltation.
Now to motherhood. With the increasing wave of child abuse and other social vices, mothers in the country have been advised to pay more attention to the upbringing of their children in order to have a better society. This was at a special service held by the Aso Villa Chapel in Abuja in celebration of the 2019 Mother's Day. Vice President Yemi Oshimbaju, Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, and Head of the Civil Service, Winifred Oyuita, were present at the special service.
Mothers, we need to arise and shine. Indeed, darkness has covered the earth and gross darkness the people. The Lord will arise over everyone in this.
The foundation of every nation starts from the upbringing of a child at home.
Mothers are generally a caring species. In those days, mothers really cared. They still do care, but I can tell you that the pets of mothers is what has kept us alive, and that is what gives us the treat.
And now news from Rivers State, where the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, says, contrary to alleged insinuations about fresh elections, the Commission will only undertake collation of results from 6 council areas apart from Abuja Udwa, where supplementary elections will hold. Robinson Deratide reports that the National Commissioner in charge of Edo, Bayelsa and Rivers, May Agbamuche Mbu, made this known at a stakeholders meeting in Port Harcourt.
This is a new slate and we're going to start again. And when I say start again, we're going to do it openly. You're all going to be there to see and make your comments. We'll allow those who have any genuine comments to make, we'll allow them to do so.
Maintain the openness, maintain the transparency. The church has prayed, but we need peace. And we Muslims, we ask and demand for peace.
And on to security. The Nigerian police has reassured stakeholders of commitment towards sustaining the community policing initiative to ensure adequate security of lives and property in the country. Correspondent Joshua Ojito reports that the Acting Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamu Abubakar, stated this in Lafia during a visit to Governor Umaru Tanko Al-Makura of Nasarawa State.
And in doing so, we are in the process of restructuring the way the police function is so as to meet up with the challenge of community policing. By the idea of community policing is to move policing to the community. Let the community initiate, then we'll come and cooperate with the community to solve the problem.
Once every individual within any community considers himself as part and parcel of the security arrangement, I think success would have been achieved even before we are back on the project.
Meanwhile, the Nigerian Air Force has issued a statement concerning a viral video and pictures circulating online of military personnel flogging suspected armed bandits in Shinkafi, Zamfara State. According to the statement signed by the Nigerian Air Force Director of Public Relations, Air Commodore Ibikunle Daramola, some of those implicated were indeed NAF personnel stationed at the Galadi subsector at the time, who intercepted suspected armed bandits and resorted to unauthorized methods to extract information. The Nigerian Air Force therefore wishes the public to note that it does not condone such human rights violations and has since taken steps to investigate and take appropriate disciplinary action against those found culpable. And the federal government says it is going to set up 6 cashew processing plants in 4 states. A statement by the Minister of Agriculture, Audu Ogbe, says Enugu and Benue states will have 2 plants each and 1 each for Kogi and Oyo states. The minister says the initiative is aimed at adding value to the produce, creating employment and wealth to the country. That's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Kieran after that.
Now, You are watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Now let's turn to business. The Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Dr. Okechukwu Nalama, says the implementation of export-oriented special economic zones across the country is key to promoting agricultural commodities such as palm oil, cassava, tomatoes, and others. Now let's join Comforter Modu for this and other business development.
In the Nigerian Stock Exchange Weekly Market Report of the week ended 29th March 2019, investors traded a total turnover of 2.629 billion shares worth 12.794 billion naira in 15,558 deals, in contrast to a total of 1.198 billion shares valued at 12.273 billion naira in 18,293 deals. Financial services industry took the lead in the activity chart with 2.346 billion shares valued at 8.602 billion naira traded in 9,031 deals, consequently contributing 89.23% and 67.23% to the total equity turnover volume and value. The ICT industry followed with 140.531 million shares worth 28.117 million naira in 113 deals. The third place was consumer goods industry with a turnover of 54.152 million shares worth 2.099 billion naira in 2,613 deals. Companies that led trading in the top three equities were Wema, Chams, and Zenith Bank PLC. Investors have also been urged to turn their attention to currency trading apart from the capital market to shore up financial inclusion efforts of the government and reduce aggregate demand in the economy and unemployment rate.
Just as we also have in equities investment, you have to understand fundamental analysis, you have to understand technical analysis, the factors that shape the movement in Forex, particularly the US dollar, so including the global variables involved.
In the meantime, some staple food like rice, tomatoes, yam, and other consumables have witnessed some changes in price.
100 of that one is 80,000. 100 of this one is 35,000. 100 of this one is 65.
Rice we sell 15.5 per bag. Half bag we sell like 750. The jerrycan oil we sell it 12,000. The King's Emperor 11.5.
Meanwhile, Edo State Governor Godwin Obaseki has advocated the resuscitation of the moribund Nigerian Institute for Oil Palm Research in Benin City, Edo State, as part of the quest for economic diversification.
We have to think about the planting materials, because if we are going to cultivate 1 million hectares of oil palm in the next few months or few years, where are we going to get the planting materials from? Our research institute that was created for this purpose is almost moribund. So we've got to think about the research to create those materials.
All right, thank you very much, Comforter Modu, for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria. Next for us now, we'll take a look at the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
All right, and now we have our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atoyebi, who is here. Very good morning.
Good morning,
and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good morning, Kinsley.
All right, Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the weekend.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have politics and, of course, the leadership of the 9th Assembly dominating the lead stories for all the papers that we have with us this morning. Let's begin with the Punch newspaper. The Punch has it with a kicker, speakership race. APC reps and others back Gbajabiamila and PDP to meet lawmakers elect. Details of the story can be found on page 2. And for the leadership newspaper, it also comes with a kicker. It says 9th National Assembly. Nobody can impose leaders on us, and that's according to APC lawmakers, as Gbajabiamila formally declares for Speaker. That's on page 4. Daily Independent says reps reject Gbajabiamila as he joins race for Speaker's office.
All right, now to the New Telegraph newspaper, New Telegraph. The lead headline, Goje Adamu back out of Senate presidency race. It has 4 riders here. Rufai takes former Gombe governor to Buhari, that's on page 4. And the APC tips Gaya, Borofis, Omo Agege, Alimi Kena as National Assembly officers. And now Southeast to produce chief whip. Gbajabiamila Bago declare for speakership. Let's begin by here. These are...
You also have a Nigerian pilot.
Yes. Now, on the Nigerian pilot, actually, you know, the lead story on the Nigerian pilot is also about a tussle for positions of authority at the National Assembly. This one says zoning of National Assembly leadership tears APC apart, with 4 riders, aggrieved lawmakers plot alliance with PDP. APC Southeast wants Gbajabiamila to drop ambition. Ndume insists he has not withdrawn from race. We're going to apply the whip Tinubu wants.
Well, the interesting thing is that there are several strategies in play now. The members-elect of the All Progressive Congress from the Northwest zone met in Kaduna and resolved to support the zonal direction of the All Progressive Congress. That is the direction of the party. Their spokesperson, Ibrahim Ali, also revealed, however, that they also support one of their own, a member of their own, for a position that is required to be zoned to their northwest. And they have their eye on the position of the speaker. As at the last count, 16 members elect, including a female member, have thrown their hats, or do I say headgear now, into the challenge. In fact, the only female was a former member of the House and just returned from a cabinet position. And so is a ranking officer that's going to contest. Similarly, the leadership also indicate that members elect from North Central State are now saying that it is time for them too to produce the speaker. Already, the party indicated candidate from the Southwest is also having some challenge from that zone of the country. From the Senate, the Northeast is vehement that the party cannot by on its own identify a candidate without consulting the senators from that geopolitical zone. Apparently, the vociferous senator who has been challenging that interest had actually indicated in his writing his interest for the position to the party before the party announced its position. A spokesman for the Senate also says that the adoption of the candidate did not amount to imposition. He says the All Progressive Congress candidate emerged from a recommendation made and widely accepted by majority of all Progressive Congress senators. He says this was to avoid the subterfuge of 2015. The party recommendation was applauded and without any dissent at that place. So the choices are there, but the fact of the matter remains that, yes, everybody is free to have their say, but at the end of the day, it's the honorable distinguished senators elect and the honorable members elect that will cast their vote to determine who leads them.
Absolutely,
so at the moment, you know, they're just, you know, the cabinet, of course, jostling for that position, and alignments and realignments.
Yes, but actually they have been very cautious. Once beaten, they say you be twice shy. Because if you remember 2015, I think the clerk of the National Assembly then was somehow complicit in what evolved, particularly if you compare the election in the Senate with that of the House of Representatives. In the House of Representatives, he came and did a roll call and made sure of the members elect available before he commenced. That was not done in the Senate. And you recall at the Senate, there had been an announcement of a meeting at the International Conference Center. So many of the senators were not there.
Well, that's the game of politics.
The question always arose if your convocation time was 9 a.m. What were you doing at an alternative venue rather than in the chamber of the Senate?
That's another argument.
I think that was
the question on that loophole.
That's what happened. If at the time your flight is called, you are not available, and the flight takes off.
But if the clerk had done a roll call, you would have seen the number of persons, whether there was a quorum before he could go ahead.
There was a quorum.
There was a quorum. It's just not in majority. All right, so we'll see how the sun and sets out going forward. Now, let's return to the Punch newspaper, the potpourri of other stories, politics and economy. Now, above the nameplate of the Punch, banks listed on NSE, that is the stock exchange, to pay 103 billion naira in taxes. That's on page 29. PDP and APGA want fresh governorship poll in Zamfara and Katsina. There's a sad one. Husband, wife, and two children and 9 others die in Bauchi crash. Now, chopper, that's helicopter crash. Kogi government and others would have been in trouble if I had died, says Oshibajo. And 2 earpieces beside the nameplate. Delayed appeal court's decisions worry Onoren's lawyers. That's page 3. And on page 7, police promote 3 CPs and nearly 9,000 senior officers.
All right, to the New Telegraph once again, New Telegraph newspaper. Above the nameplate of the New Telegraph, 8 banks garnered 15.4 trillion naira deposits in 2018. And just below the nameplate, we have other stories there. Kingsley read one a short while ago. Police Commission promotes Frank Mba, and of course about 8,915 senior officers is on page 5 of the New Telegraph. Stock market posts 48 billion naira loss in quarter 1 2019 is on page 6. Fidelity Bank grows profit by 30.6% to 25.1 billion is on page 27. Now, school senior prefect falls off mango tree and dies. That's unfortunate. His name is Oluwole. All right, now at the bottom of the New Telegraph, we have NCAA warns pilots, airlines over hazardous weather. Controllers may close airspace. It's on page 5. All right, Bayo.
Just before Bayo comes to, let me also take other stories from the Daily Independent, and you just take them along. Above the nameplate of Daily Independent newspaper, and says disquiet in Lagos Assembly as APC, overplanned by APC to deny Obasa speakership. That's page 10. Now, this on the aviation sector. Airlines cancelled 134 flights in Nigeria in 1 month, with a rider airports used by 1.2 million passengers in January. And now, to the bottom half of the front page of the paper, you see the story there on the promotion of 3 CPs and others. And the second list story, coming to almost to the foot of the front page of the paper, APC Senator Marafa insists party didn't conduct primaries in Zamfara. With a rider, Shinkafi asks tribunal to order fresh poll without party. And INEC promises transparency in Rivers poll, rules out fresh exercise. A rider to that says PDP wants Malami against plot to scuttle poll coalition. And then scores killed as bandits attack Zamfara communities.
Yes, thank you, Kingsley. Let's start from the human interest story that you read. A ghastly motor accident along the Bauchi-Gombe Road claimed 13 lives. Sadly, a man, his wife, his 2 children, as well as a sister to the wife, were all killed in that accident. The accident was in a bus car with 13 passengers and a saloon car with 6 passengers. The 2 vehicles were coming from opposite direction and had a head-on collision 2:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight. The 5 persons from one family have already been buried. Through the royal family in Bauchi into mourning. 6 others are receiving treatment at the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa Teaching Hospital. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Meteorological Services says the rainy season will commence around March, April in the south and will also be around May, June in the north. However, ahead of that, they say that the airspace may be shut temporarily by the traffic controllers due to adverse weather conditions. However, air travel is still one of the safest way to travel. All these are precautionary measures, and they are insisting that pilots and airline operators have been enjoined to exercise extreme caution, particularly during flights, and especially when they have been warned about hazardous weather. There should not be any adventurous pilots who insist on trying their luck and endangering passengers' life. Meanwhile, Kirian was trying to avoid a fast one by Kingsley, because today is April 1st and Fool's Day. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and Mother's Day has been described as the pillar of the nation that must not be corrupted. That is, the mother is the pillar of the nation that must be corrupted. A cleric of the Christ Disciples Church in Ilorin, on the occasion of Mother's Day yesterday, said that mothers must be exemplary to their children, because the children and their worlds are their role models, and they tend to emulate them mostly than the other siblings. Because of this, they are most familiar with what their mother does, and therefore they should try to do what they think should not mislead their children. Mothers must be mindful that what they do in the presence of the children is what the children will continue to copy.
Exactly.
And therefore, mothers must be revered.
Yes, let me take you back to the accident incident, in Bauchi State. And if you look at what happened, from what you explained, it's a head-on collision in the broad daylight. So what would have been involved here? Is it wrong overtaking, overspeeding, or what, Kingsley? I mean, because if the two drivers had the patience required for driving, especially on highways, such could be avoided.
No, if you hear head-on collision, broad daylight, certainly it will be over a bend. It cannot be on street light, because they will have sighted one another from across. So when you try to overtake on a bend without sighting what is coming ahead, the tendency is that within split seconds, you see a car and it is already too late. Because accident happens within split seconds, exactly, and it's too late. So that definitely must have been something like that happened.
Yeah, may their souls rest in peace. Yes. Kiri and Ambaya, the issues you have raised are very, very pertinent. It could be at a sharp bend. It could also be at a vanishing point. You know, you're up a hill, maybe there's a truck, you want to overtake the truck, but you cannot see afar. So where are your driving skills? Where are your driving skills? Don't overtake on the bend. Usually, it's unfortunate, but
we're talking about skills when most of our drivers don't even have the understanding of a zebra crossing. You know, if people stand on the zebra crossing, they could be crushed in this country. Virtually all zebra crossings I know in Abuja here are not respected by drivers. So if you don't have the common knowledge of how to make use of the rules, what will you be applying skills now?
Yeah, well, that's I mean, this is the consequence that we're just talking about.
Being conversant with the rules, yes.
All right, now to the editorials. There's nothing new on the Nigerian pilot. Of course, we've read the lead story in that newspaper. So let's turn to the editorials for this morning, coming from the Daily Sun newspapers, page 15 to be precise. The marginal reduction in interest rate. Now, the decision of the monetary policy PMC of the Central Bank of Nigeria to cut the monetary policy rate MPR, also known as the baseline for interest rate in the country, from 14% to 13.5%, may boost economic activities and attract investment inflow into the country. Let Bayo come in here and let us understand what this is all about.
What editorial is saying is that the MPR is responsible for improving the microeconomic conditions as well as reducing inflation. However, the editorial is arguing that the reduction in the margin of 0.5% is too minimal and it ought to have increased. The editorial is also saying that the CRR, cash reserve ratio, that was retained at 22.5 and liquidity ratio at 30%, would have also been freed more credit to lenders. So the editorial is saying that central bank needs to focus on monetary tightening policy to increase the level of credit to business. They believe that this is the only way that we can continue to give greater impetuses to the economy. And above all, the editorial is saying that the central bank must liaise with the government policy to ensure that its policy complements the initiative of government. Particularly, it's pointing out to the dangers that are intervening. The general elections that came had pumped a lot of money into the system. There's possibility of the salary increase from the wage increase, which is also going to be an impetus for increased inflation. And an indication that the VAT rate will be increased are all potentials that can undermine the policy of government. And therefore, they think the central bank should be very alert to, in future, increase the reduction in the MPR.
All right, Bayo, thank you very much. Incidentally, that's one of the topics we had for our discussion segment on Friday.
Oh, yes.
It's an issue that will continue to, of course, engage public attention. Bayo, thanks a lot for being around today.
Thanks for having me.
See you again tomorrow. All right, this is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be dealing with a very important matter, budgetary templates for all the 3 tiers of government and proper allocation of funds. Thank you very much, Aisha Bale, for that background. Now, joining us in the Abuja studios as well as our other network centers to discuss issues, let's welcome Professor Nazifi Dharma. He's a professor of economics at the University of Abuja. Professor Dharma, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
And congratulations on your full professorship.
Thank you very much.
Abuja.
Thank you.
And by the way, Professor Dharma used to be a director at the National Planning Commission. Also here with us in the studios is Dr. Otive Igbuzo. He's Executive Director of the African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development. Dr. Igbuzo, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Okay.
And also joining us in Abuja is Honorable Sergius Ogu, member of House of Representatives. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And from Lagos, we have joining us this morning Olani Olaleye, data analyst and at Budget Nigeria. I hope I got that correctly. Welcome to the program.
I'm having me.
Also from Kaduna, we have the Commissioner for Budget and Planning, Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. Mohammed, thank you indeed for joining us this morning on the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, gentlemen, once again, pleasure to have you with us. You listen to the background report, and the issue has to do with the budgetary templates, and in particular, allocation as well as, of course, release of funds to critical sectors that ordinarily should catalyze development and enhance the well-being and welfare of the citizens. But what exactly do we know at the moment about the budgetary cycle, as in particular, the templates adopted by the federal, state, and local governments? Let's begin with Professor Dharma.
Thank you very much. I think before I answer your question directly, we need to do some realistic background analysis. Now, if you look at the budget cycle, the commencement of the process, the time it usually takes to pass the budget, it's usually a manifestation of a deep-rooted problem, which I have said earlier in my previous outings, and I'm repeating it. In a developing economy like ours, with 180 million people, for you to actually achieve sustainable development and prosperity that impact positively on the life of the people, you cannot achieve it in the absence of a coherent and structured national development planning culture. Why? Because with a national planning or with a national development plan, it encapsulates literally every aspect and needs of the people at federal, state, and local government level. And the reality of economic development is that there are mutual complementarities and dependencies, and that it is only through a coherent national development planning that those complementarities and dependencies can be identified and funded accordingly, and therefore beyond the rhetorical expansion in the GDP or gross domestic product, accretion to national foreign reserve and what others. What is realistic is, for every naira that government is spending, in what way does that spending transform the quality of life of citizens? And you see, in a federating economy with 3 tiers of government, even if the federal government is doing its best, without complementation from the state government, without complementation from the local governments that have almost been they have almost been delisted from the reality of our economy, you cannot be able to see realistic and tangible positive benefits accruing to the people, which will impact on the quality of their life and therefore making the spending meaningful. Now, coming to the issue of the budget itself, particularly at the federal level, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there seems to be one persistent quagmire that is reoccurring. Ideally, the budget cycle should start by July, when the ministries, departments, and agencies will start making their preparations, so that by September, the budget estimates should have been presented to the National Assembly. And then the National Assembly will use those 3 months to look at the provisions and then call for the ministries, departments, and agencies to come and defend it and so on. But unfortunately, because we don't have a planning culture, it comes to a point whereby at the National Assembly, every member in the National Assembly, and with due apology to my colleague here, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, representing the people, will want to infuse as much programs as possible, and in the process of doing that infusion, valuable quality time is wasted deliberating over non-issues, and then you see the budget being deliberated sometimes up to the following year, April, March, and May. But you see, if you have a national development plan, which is an extremely consultative process, it will have been possible for every single member of the National Assembly at every level to be able to encapsulate the needs and demand of his constituents into a 5-year budget program, so that when it is time to present the budget, it is just to capture the cost component of that year and possibly make some little variation to take care for inflation, and therefore it shouldn't take more than 60 days to be able to pass it.
Professor Dama, that was a good backgrounding to this conversation, if you ask me, from professional point of view. It has touched almost all aspects of the loopholes that the nation has been experiencing over time with respect to our budgeting system. And of course, I'd like to also ask Honorable Good to come in here in line with the same question, put out by Kinsley. But I'd like to add that there's the usual budget cycle, proposal, defense, approval, releases, and oversight. And I want to see your assessment of the budgeting templates used by governments. And of course, I'd like you to make reference to what Professor Dama raised with respect to the infusing, from the National Assembly that oftentimes delays, the budget process.
Thank you very much. The attention of Nigerians is always drawn to the fact that the National Assembly members are inserting projects, and that brings the distraction. That's not correct. In the first case, if you even insert projects into the budget, you are representing a constituency in Nigeria, not in Niger, and not in Ghana. So at the end of the day, it's going to be for the betterment of your constituency. That's in Nigeria. But in any case, from what Prof just said, we can shorten that cycle from when the budget is laid by the president to when we'll begin to attend to it, invite the MDAs, the oversight the previous year. Because now we have given you a budget, 2018 for example. You need to tell us how you have spent that money, then before you're asking for new ones. Because most times they just bring back same thing. So let me just quickly add also that when Nigerians talk about the National Assembly keeping the budget and all, it's in their best interest. We just came through an election cycle. The government spent a lot of money for these elections. We spend a lot of time selling ourselves to our constituency, our constituents. Now we have been elected to represent them, to be their ears, their eyes. So if we do not take time to scrutinize that document and it goes out there, who will suffer? The Nigerians will suffer. So if I go back to what Prof was saying, MTEF, just partly answer what Prof was talking about, the planning. MTEF is supposed to cover for a period of 3 years. That's the national planning. So now you come with a budget. I agree, we should have that 3-month cycle for the National Assembly to look at it and scrutinize it. But within that time, the president has advisors. His ESCs, they call them, for the House of Rep, and then for the Senate. What is their work? If you ask me, is to walk the corridors in the National Assembly. And then the ministers should interface with the National Assembly. It's not enough to just give a dog, what they try to do with the National Assembly, give a dog a bad name and hang it. When you there should have been meetings, and I know there are meetings usually before the president lays the budget. If you are telling the National Assembly, this is what we have in mind, this is what we are proposing. When it comes, when we are working on it, beside the MDAs coming to defend what they spent before and tell us how they intend to spend the money in the current estimates they are bringing, you still walk the corridors. In the private sector, that's how business is done. But it's in government that people don't show enough concern. So at the end of the day, you just come to the camera to say, okay, the National Assembly is not doing that, and we are saying, okay, fine. The last time we talked about padding, guess what? The agencies of government were the ones telling National Assembly members, put money in my agency. The ministers were involved. But they couldn't defend it before the president. That's why they called it padding. So we should tell ourselves the truth if we really want this country to move ahead.
But I'm not cutting you short, please, just for you to round off. Is there any need for the executive and the National Assembly to have a pre-budget meeting, that will metamorphose into a budget that will not encounter delays in the National Assembly?
That happens. That happens. So that's what I'm saying. That happens before you bring the budget. But when that process is going on, if I need, as a businessman, well, that's where I'm coming from. If I need you to attend to a document, there's every tendency that I'm following up on you, coming to your office and putting calls through. So you don't just dump that document with the National Assembly. If the MDAs that wrote that document and give to budget and planning to present, you are calling them to say, okay, we gave you money last budget cycle. How have you spent this money? They are not even coming to defend it. So what should the National Assembly do? Rubber stamp the new one you have brought. You have not told Nigerians how you spent the previous one. And these are the intricacies. But Nigerians don't seem to understand that. And most times just give us budget. The one that we gave you last time. Have you told us how you have spent the money? And it's a circle. Like the Constitution talks about President laying the budget at any time in the year. So the minute the budget is signed, it's a full circle, one whole year. If we have not finished that circle, there's no need asking for a new one. We should be talking about the one that we have given. Has it been funded? We are still talking about 2018 projects now. My own zonal intervention projects, they just advertised them for 2018, and this is 2019.
First quarter.
I'm almost finishing my fourth term, or I'll finish my fourth term. But 2018, third year, they just advertised it. If I was relying on that to win my elections, I won't be here.
All right, Honorable Sergio Sogun, thank you very much. Let's bring in now Dr. Otiva Egbuzo. Dr. Egbuzo, process is one thing. Now, the template for allocating the resources that come out of the process is critical before we now talk about the impact in terms of the national welfare and prosperity. What are your comments?
Thank you very much. First, let me commend NTA for focusing on this issue of budget, because budget is very important, and it is through the instrumentality of the budget that government delivers services to citizens. When you want to look at the template, first of all, I think we need to look at what is an ideal template. An ideal template is that every country, I want to be as simple as possible, every country should have a national development plan, long-term, not ERGP, 2 or 3 years. And then, from that national development plan, you develop policies of how each sector, each problem will be dealt with. And then you have annual budget that is drawn from the plan. And then the annual budget will have an estimate of the revenue, sources of revenue that it will utilize, and how it will spend that money. And there are assumptions of how it's going to get the revenue. And then you allocate it based on the long-term national development plan. And then, like Prof mentioned, you have complementarity with the states and the local government through, in Nigeria, the national councils that various sectors have. And then you make sure that a good percentage is devoted to capital expenditure, because it's capital expenditure that will generate the economy and make trees grow. That's number one. Number two, you make sure you have big allocations to 4 sectors that affect the life of citizens. These sectors are infrastructure, education, health, and agriculture. But the reality of our budgeting templates in Nigeria in the past is that it has deviated from this ideal template that I've laid out. First, as of today, we don't have a long-term national development plan. People talk about India, they talk about China. All these countries have long-term national development plan that are reviewed every 5 years, and then any party that comes, you use your own policy prescription to deal with the issues. But we don't have national development. 2, increasingly, at the end of the 1970s, even up to 1980, the allocation for capita was over 50%. But increasingly, this has gone to 70%. In 1 year, it was 85%. One of my friends...
Are you talking about capital or recurrent?
Recurrent. Recurrent was always less than 50% in the 70s and the 80s, in the Second Republic. But it has grown to take the entire budget. One of my friends, illustrates what capital and recurrent is. You have food you want to cook. The people to cook the food will go to the kitchen and cook the food. And then they also eat from it. So, what they eat is recurrent. What they bring to the parlor for the entire country to drive things is capital. But what we are seeing is that in Nigeria, those in the kitchen are eating everything. At 1 year, it was 85%. So the reality is that you have little resources to devote to those areas that will affect the lives of the people. In addition to that, you see that if you look at the structure of our own budget, there is a huge challenge with revenue. Because in other countries, where do they get the revenue from? They get it from taxes. Prof will tell us how many of the 180 million people are paying taxes. Statistics show that Nigeria is one of the, or the lowest tax-paying country in the world. The number of people, because of the political economy of oil. And if you come to the structure of our own budget, you see that the structure cannot give room for transparency and accountability. For instance, there are statutory transferred direct at the budget, which goes to the National Assembly, goes to the National Judicial Council, goes to several other agencies. Nobody knows the details of those budgets. There are special funds, 4.18%, that goes to 4 places. A stabilization fund, ecological fund, natural resource fund, and one other fund, 4 of them. Now, the audit report of the federal government 2012 indicates that these funds are mismanaged. They are used to pay salaries. They are severance packages. There is no transparency in it. So, the reality is that the Nigerians' process is not meant to deliver services to city. That is why, no, it's important. You know, that is why you see that despite from 1999 to 2014, Nigeria received over 70 trillion naira, according to NIETI. But this has not translated into increased infrastructure, educational facilities, health. This regime has tried to improve in some of those challenges. For instance, when President Muhammad Buhari was elected in 2015, they stated an expression to increase the budgetary allocation for capital to 40%. That was what the Vice President said. But the first budget, they managed to get 30%. Unfortunately, in this 2019 budget, it has decreased to 23%.
Dr. Ibuzo, you know, you have actually driven us to a point where we might do a little bit of a digression for further explanation. But for now, let's go to Lagos, where we have Olani Olaleye. Olani, Dr. Ibuzo talked about long-term national planning, which is missing in Nigeria. He also cited the Asian tigers, you know, who today have almost arrived when it comes to level of development. They had long-term development program. Now, budget as an estimate of income and expenditure for a particular period of time has had dramatic episodes in Nigeria since 1999, and some school of thought would say that Nigeria is even deliberately budgeting for deficit. What should be the right template for budgeting in Nigeria?
Thank you for having me. I think the problem we're having presently in Nigeria is not about the drafting of policy. The major problem is the implementation of policy. How has government tried to implement all the policies that have been drafted? For instance, the ARGP, how has it been able to follow the template of the budget? And over time, we have noticed that government overly projected what they won't be achieving the fiscal year. For instance, we noticed that when government projected for oil revenue, when government projected for non-oil revenue, or what government projects their revenue, is always overly optimistic in their projection. For instance, when we look at the oil revenue, when government is projecting about 3.7 trillion to get from oil revenue in 2019 fiscal year. If you look at the budget implementation report of Q3 2018, and we notice that government has only seen about 1.4 trillion from the oil revenue, which is the major component of the revenue of the government. From oil revenue, we get at least 66% of the total revenue of the government. So when we talk about the template of the government, and we look at the income, then we look at how much government wants to spend. In 2019, government wants to spend 8.8 trillion at the total expenditure. Then they are looking for the revenue of about 6 trillion. And the deficit is about 1.8 trillion. The total money government is using to service debt is even more than the money government gets from the revenue. Government is planning to service debt for about 2 trillion. If government is servicing debt for about 2 trillion, how much government spend on capital expenditure that really affect the life of the citizen? In the 2019 fiscal year, government is projecting or spending a total of about 2 trillion on capital expenditure. But if you look at the budget implementation report of the previous years, we will notice that the money government have actually spent on capital expenditure is not even up to 1 trillion. So if you're also looking at debt to capital expenditure, government has also said they are borrowing money to build capital infrastructure. So if you are looking at that, then we look at the capital expenditure, how much government has spent. In the last 3 years, government have spent about 2 trillion on capital expenditure when government have borrowed about 6 trillion in the last 10 years, in the last 3 years. So if the government is telling us that they are borrowing money for capital infrastructure to do infrastructure, that means the money government is borrowing is not even corresponding to how much government government is borrowing is not even corresponding to how much government is spending. So if we are looking at the template of government, then we notice that majorly what government is projecting to get from the revenues, what government is projecting to get from non-revenue, and what government is projecting to get from oil revenue is not really tally with the reality we have on ground. So, for instance, I'm citing an example of Q3 budget implementation report. Government was projecting to get about 500 billion from VAT. How much has government seen from VAT? How much has government seen from custom income tax? How much is government seen from company income tax? How much is government seen from customs? So we need to look at this projection very well, and we need to look at what do people really want in Nigeria. The project that will affect the life of the citizens of Nigeria, we all know is in the capital expenditure of the government. But if you look at the allocation of health, if you look at the allocation of education, how much government is budgeting to education, which of course will improve the human capital of the citizen. If you look at the total allocation of health, total allocation of health to the percentage, we look at government is budgeting about 7% of the total budget to health. When the total capital allocation in strategic units such as works, such as transportation is getting about 300 billion. We look at health and education, we see the total allocation for capital expenditure is about 40 or 50 billion. So government needs to prioritize the needs of the people. Government needs to look at what people really want, and we need to have a system where citizens really have input in the budget. Because over the time in the budget process, government have not been really taking the citizen along in the drafting of the budget. So we need a system where citizens, through their representatives or through the CSO, will also be part of the budget process. We just have a situation where the MDAs just present their budgets to the executive, and the executive present the budgets to the National Assembly without citizens having any input. So we need to have a citizen-oriented budget where every citizen we make an input into the Nigerian budget, because we see a situation where government actually budgets what is not needed in a particular community. How do you know the needs of the people? For instance, in my community, we might need school more than we need an health center. So government really need to know the service, you really need to know what people want, to what is budgeted, what is allocated in the budget. So I think in drafting up the budget templates, government really needs to focus very well on the citizen. Citizen-oriented project needs to be inputted in the budget.
All right, Mr. Olaleye, thank you very much. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's go over to our Kaduna Network Center, where we allow introduce the State Commissioner for Budget and Planning, and that's Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi, you've listened to the other guests, and if the focus of the conversation has tended to be on the federal government, our consideration actually has to do with all three tiers of government. That's to say federal, state, and local government. And whatever the state of development or lack of it there is in the country today, of course, many will argue, will derive from the numbers that are aggregated from all the three tiers of government. At the state level, what is it that we find with regard to the template for budgets and priority spent? The evidence would appear to point towards more of recurrent and just financing the bureaucracy, and therefore, very little impact is manifest in terms of the welfare of the citizens and overall health and prosperity of the country.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us as state governments to participate in this program. Frequently, when the discussion on budgets is had in Nigeria, there's an exclusion of the states and local governments, which actually constitute a huge part of public spending across the country. If you take 2019, for example, the budget that has been presented by the federal government is 8.8 trillion naira. But if you go down to the states and local governments, there's probably another 8 to 9 trillion that is going to be spent by these tiers of government. Averagely, states are spending between 100 and 200 billion naira across the country. That comes up to almost about 6 trillion. And so when you remove these tiers from the conversation, really what you're having is not a full conversation. It is just a partial explanation of what Nigeria is spending. Recently, there was a meeting around education, and there was international outcry about the level of spending on education by Nigeria being lower than what was expected. Unfortunately, this had completely removed states and local governments from the equation, and when you bring these in, it changes the equation radically. So I think it's very important that when we're having these discussions that we do factor in the states and local governments, and I'm happy that NTA has done so this morning. With regards to how the allocation of spending in states are, I would actually argue to the contrary of what you have laid out, that states are actually doing probably better today than federal government in terms of the allocation of resources to our budget. If you take Kaduna State, for example, since 2015, we have consistently allocated 60% minimum of our budgets to capital spending and returned recurrent spending to 40%.
All right, our guest in Kaduna, we'd like to really apologize because we're not getting a good signals from Kaduna to allow you continue this conversation. But we hope that in the course of the program that we could have an improved reception from our Kaduna networks, and so that we can return to you. Gentlemen, we are talking about...
I think because we're going to have Olaniyi leave us anytime, so maybe we'll return to him because in Lagos, that's for the budget data analyst. Olaniyi, if you can hear us, because we understand we're going to sign it off in another 5-10 minutes. Budget, does it also focus on the templates and priorities spent of the states and local governments? And if so, what is it that you have found in terms of allocation and value for money at the end of the day?
Okay, thank you. At the state level, we notice that there are a lot of opacity when it comes to budget at the state level. We are driving a campaign where we call the Subnational Transparency, where we are making sure that all states in the Federation publish their budget. In 2017, I think we achieved a lot in making state budget available to the public, and we got about 23 states which uploaded their budgets online. According to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, a budget is meant to be public when it's published on the website of the state. But over time, we notice that even government, when it comes to the state level, don't follow this process. At the local government level, we've never seen a local government budget before. We have never. A local government has never presented its budget to the public in Nigeria. So when it comes to the state level, I think we still have a loss to go. I think we have about some states that have already signed into our open states. We have Kaduna, we have Ebonyi, we have Delta, we have some other states too that has already sent to our open states. We need to have a forum where states will be able to present, to make their budget public. So over time, we noticed that, and despite the fact that most of the states don't really publish their budgets, for instance, in 2017, Lagos State only provided always about 8 pages, which is about summary of their budget. Actually, we sent a budget of about 800 billion. We only got about 8 pages of the budget. So how do we track this project? How do you know the budget? How do you know the allocations that are in various communities? How do you want citizens to monitor this project when only 8 pages are only provided? So I think we need to come to the realization that states needs to make their budgets available to the public, and to be accountable to the citizens that elected them into the offices. So presently, we're in 2019 also, the campaign is still going on, the advocacy to make state budgets open. And the focus has always been on the federal budget over time, but I think state is also coming to the realization of making their budgets open. And some states have been responsive, and you come to a situation where some states will tell you that they don't owe anybody any responsibility to make their budgets public. So I think those are the problem we are facing at the moment when it comes to the state level. But I think there are some improvement, and I think 2019 will also be better when it comes to that. We achieved a lot in 2018. We got about 25 states that made their budgets open to the public. And in 2019 too, some states are already signing in, and we hope before the middle of the year, most states will have at least responded to make their budgets accountable and to make every penny they spend in their budgets accountable to the public.
Well, thank you very much. I hope we'll have time to return to you before you leave us. But now, back to Abuja. But we've just received signals that Kaduna is back, and we would like to return to the Commissioner for Budget and Planning, Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. A short while ago, we had issues along the line of communication to Kaduna Network Center. So we are sorry about that. Now that you are back, I would like you to continue from where you stopped. You were actually trying to give us an analysis of what takes place at the state level with respect to budgeting. Of course, we have raised situations here where we acknowledge the fact that when it comes to state and local government level, little is heard about state and local government budgeting. What is responsible for this? And again, add that to your analysis previously.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies that we were cut off. What I was trying to explain was the quantum of spending at the state and local government levels across the country, which amount to a little bit probably over, if you quantify it, what the federal government is spending. So really what we're looking at as a nation in 2019 is not a spending of 8.8 trillion, but almost 20 trillion. And I think what is then interesting is for us to have a national conversation around how much of this 20 trillion is actually going to go to public works, how much of it is going to go to recurrent spending, and then to fashion out something that's coherent around a national agenda. I think that's what has been missing on the national scale. We did have some discussions with the federal government around the ERGP during its formulation, but that has not translated into how we are all allocating resources at the subnational government level. In terms of Kaduna State specifically, since 2015, we have consistently managed to provide 60% of our expenditure for capital projects. And this is because, as one of the speakers mentioned, we are acutely aware that the reason why government exists is to stimulate the economy, to provide those dividends to the people of that state or the nation. And if you do not provide this in the form of capital expenditure, then what you're doing is just spending to run government itself, which is not what government was meant for. And so we've tried to do that. But when you come to cutting recurrent expenditure, it comes with a lot of hard decisions to be made. And I'm not sure if the country as a whole is ready for these discussions. These are things that we need to discuss, because for each of that 100 billion that you cut, you are cutting off supplies to other areas of government, whether it be salaries, wages, or other recurrent spending around maintenance and other issues. So these are some of the things that we really need to contend with. For the states, there are a number of shining lights that are coming out, and we have a new program together with the federal government in terms of making budgets open and transparent. A number of states today have their budgets open and transparent online. I was just listening to the budget guy and would like to correct him. The Kaduna State, for example, has all of our local government budgets on the internet. Today, if you go to openkaduna.com.ng, all our local government budgets are there. You can see how they are structured, and we worked on this together with your organization, so I think you need to check again. But basically, I think that it is important when we're discussing templates around the budget that we understand that we have moved from an era of incremental budgeting in Kaduna and in Nigeria, which is where budgets were just made up of adding 10% year on year. And this has overbloated our budgets to a level where we cannot fund it. And we do have a revenue problem in Nigeria. We do have a revenue problem in states. These are areas that we need to focus on very, very strictly and importantly, so that we're able to unlock the resources. If you look at, for example, last year's budget, I listened to the member of the House of Representatives, and he's completely correct. You see, when you provide a budget and you can only, at the end of the day, spend 30 to 40% of it, it means that inherently within the projections of the budget, within the medium-term expenditure framework of that budget, there were some errors. And we need to be able to come back and reduce political expectations and reduce our ambitions and say, what can we fund really as a nation? And what can we focus on? So that we are not doing projects that are meant in 2017, still trying to commence them in 2019. You know, these are some of the conversations that we need to have. And from the national and state and local government level, we need to have these together journey, because we are one economy, we are serving one people, which is the Nigerian people, and these are things that are critical and important.
All right, Mohammed Sani Abdullahi, thank you very much there for your comments. I mean, one matter that will arise from what you have said is to say, look, what then is the role of the National Economic Council, which is supposed to also serve as a clearinghouse for the harmonization of economic policies across all tiers of government? We'll return to you in the course of the conversation, but let's come back to our guests in the studios, Professor Nazif Dama, Dr. Otive Igbuzo, and Honorable Sergio Sogun. Gentlemen, we keep talking, for instance, about the hike in recurrent expenditure, and priority spending, the challenge that arises therefrom. You've already talked about the issue of the absence of national planning and the inadequacy of the current medium-term expenditure framework, which borrows from the rolling plan that we used to have under the military. General Babangida had that during his time. Here is one issue that I would like you to also take a look at. Have we not seen in the country today that we have a number of agencies and commissions that are supposed, or that are doing the work ordinarily that's supposed to be done by line ministries? So at the federal level, you find funding for these agencies will take part of your this because they have their own bureaucracy. The line ministries, sometimes they hardly ever get their resources, which is worse. The situation is aggravated at the state level. Because at the state level, I'm sure if you were to go around and ask, in terms of priority spend, the resources that the state ministries received, it will be a pittance. In the meantime, you have overhead cost. Is this a challenge for us in our budgetary template, priority spend, and therefore our quest to have a more prosperous nation?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this background analysis. And it is expedient for us to look at 2 and 3 issues relative to what you have highlighted. Number one, at the federal level and at the state level, as you have alluded to, there seems to be extreme duplicity of functions by various ministries and agencies, and therefore if you streamline them, perhaps you could have a serious reduction in terms of the current expenditure component, which will free resources for capital expenditure component. That is one. Number two, is the issue for us to sit down as a country, at the federal, state, and the private sector, to have a realistic conversation about even the costing structure of capital projects. If you make comparison with other emerging economies, you realize that Nigeria, in terms of capital expenditure delivery, have one of the highest and costliest. That is 2. Number 3, let us also have realistic conversation about the allowances and salaries of political office holders and members of National Assembly and state houses of assembly at both federal and national level. The costing, what goes to them in terms of allowances, is completely disproportional to the economic reality of this country as it is today. That is 2. Number 3, let us also look at the tax structure and the taxes we are collecting. Who is paying what? Who is not paying what? Of course, you cannot be able to increase taxes in the context of our economic reality beyond a certain threshold. But you can make structural improvements in the collection process and also in the spending process. We also need to have realistic conversation as to how we cost projects at the federal level. And I say this, and I'm challenging anybody to contradict me. If you go to any ministry, agency, or department, particularly at the federal level, nobody can give you a certification that the costing template of any capital expenditure is undertaken by a member of the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, which is the statutory agency that is supposed to do that. People just sit down, concur costs, and therefore the reason why our costing of capital projects is extremely on the high side. But in addition, it is also expedient in a democracy where people vote for those in power, for the same people in power to be more transparent with them on how their resources are spent. I think these are issues that at National Economic Council, the federal government and the state government and the private sector and all other stakeholders, honestly, we need to sit down and have a realistic conversation, because the way we are going, even the 8.8 trillion we are spending at federal level, and then when you make an average analysis, even if the country is spending 20 trillion, you realize that that money is so insignificant relative to other emerging economies that are in our peers. In 2018, Brazil budgeted at federal level, not at the regional or state level, over $1 trillion. But that money, a significant proportion of it, is provided by public-private partnership. I have alluded to this, and I will continue to talk about this, that the structure of our economy as it is today, the collection level of our taxes, the revenue from oil and its pricing, cannot provide adequately to sustainably fund developmental intervention in the context of our need. And therefore, we need non-debt, sustainable sources of funding, big-ticket capital projects, but importantly also...
Not to fund recurrent.
Not to fund recurrent, but
private capital will not come to fund agencies.
Yes, to fund capital, because a situation whereby you are borrowing so much from China, the Chinese have an inherent interest in Nigeria, and the interest may not be in parity with our national interest. And therefore, if you are borrowing so much and you are spending almost over 60% of our actual income in order to service both local and domestic debt, it tells you that in the long run and the short run, that type of expenditure, infrastructure funding is absolutely unsustainable. What we need is a more reliable, more higher quantum, but a more sustainable funding infrastructure mechanism, which a lot of other emerging economies have adopted, courtesy of the transparent policy framework and laws that guide public-private partnership that make it attractive for others to bring their resources and then complement domestic resources that are available in the country.
Funding infrastructure mechanism. We did raise a number of very important issues with respect to this conversation. Well, reading through a passage on this budget, and I came across a school of thought that is saying that considering the embarrassing underdevelopment quagmire of the country, that, one would be safe to say that all the budgets that Nigeria has had since 1960 could not achieve up to 40% success in terms of implementation. And that brings us to the issue of a failed budget. But how can a nation, a developing nation, become fully developed when it has insufficient funding for capital expenditure? A situation where even the recurrent expenditure does not meet its target. For instance, we know in this country that many states had been unable to pay salaries, pension benefits, and other entitlements to workers, and that underscores the issue of a failed recurrent expenditure. And I'd like Sedi Sogu to come in here, because you are the final gatekeepers with respect to budget processing in the country. Where have we got it wrong? And I want you to come from the point of view of what happens at the level of state and local government budgeting.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy and appreciate this discussion that for once we are bringing in the state and the local government. Because everything we talk about this country is the federal government, National Assembly. We don't talk about the State Assembly. We don't even talk about commissioners. When was the last time you heard that in the state a commissioner served an EFCC pursuing such a commissioner? Or even a local government? Like Olaniye said, we don't even have the budget of the local government because they don't run budgets. If they run any budget, I don't know how they do it. A situation where in this country now, the state government under President Obasanjo, I know they used to publish in the news, NTA, publish what they share every month. The federal government, each state, and then the local government. People knew then what the local government would get for that month. But I think now you have to go on the internet or something to Google that. I don't know where they still display that. It's important for people to know. It's not a situation when that money is paid to the state government and they just give the local government, the selected, not elected local government chairman, something for salaries and emolument. So if I go back to your question, I think the last time I was here, we were talking about a government that should work for this country. And some of us proposed the parliamentary system of government. We need to work, we need a homegrown solution. Don't just copy and paste. Our budget as it is today will not work. I have talked about the interface between the executive and the legislators not working well. That's why we have delays in passing these budgets. But the most important thing, there was this Harvard law review that said that we shouldn't be giving attention to GDP. We should have gross domestic happiness. But unfortunately, we talk, because the GDP, the man on the streets, the relevance of that GDP is not, it doesn't feel it. So my suggestion is, I think Olani has said that projects should be relevant in the constituencies or in the localities. That's why you have the elected people. If it's really working, if you elect a representative, that representative should be there. Is your eye and your ears, either in the state and capital or in Abuja. So I should be able to identify projects that my constituents need. That's why we go for briefing. And they tell me, we don't need the primary health care center. What we need is a school. And I'll say, yes, sir. And I bring that here and I put that in the zonal intervention project. So that at the end of the day, they can feel the impact of government. But as it stands today, now we are talking about spending more than 60% on recurrent. So government ideally is not meant to what's the word now? Government should be run like a business. There is no private business that can spend over 60% on recurrent and exist. It will go under immediately. And we expect government to spend over 60%, 70% on recurrent, and we expect to be profitable. It's not going to happen. That's why we're on deficit. Like Dr. Abuja said, we are spending 2.something trillion, on debt servicing, and then maybe even less than 2 trillion on capital. Like the Minister of Budget and Planning said, we do not have a budget problem or budget issue, but we have funding problem. Well, if I start on this funding project, we will not end here today. That's the topic for another day discussion. Because I strongly believe, besides relying on oil, we need to allow investors come into this country and invest their money. That's where we are missing this big time. So but that money is not coming, and it's not going to come soonest because where we are in this country. Because the first thing anybody will ask you, if I will ask you now, my brother Kinsley, will you want to go and invest in Syria as it stands today? You want to go to Syria, not even Baghdad, not even Afghanistan. But we are placed in the same category with these people. So till we sort out our home problem here, and investors come with their cash, with their dollars to invest, and then employ people. It's not the way we employ in the public sector that they employ in the private sector. It's what they need that they take. But because government has not been able to sort out their act and be profitable, they tend to be creating employment where they don't need it. The last time they were talking about minimum wage. I said it in the private sector. If labor says I must pay 100 naira to a person, there's no problem. But I will work that person around the clock to earn that 100,000 naira. But in the public sector, it's not like that. People don't have to come to work to earn a salary. Who is watching? No consequence management. If I was, okay now, for example, INEC chairman, you gave us a date of an election. everybody prepared. You had how many years to plan for it? On the eve of the election, it was cancelled. How much did you deploy? Budget, you have subheads. How much has any spent on supplementary? Is there a subhead for supplementary? Is there a subhead for cancellation? But who is asking questions? That money is spent and nobody is punished. Tomorrow you have another INEC chairman that will do exactly the same thing. He will not be sacked. He will not be jailed. And we say it's going to happen. Well, Nigeria is going to change for good. Just elect another man. Is not going to work.
All right, Honorable Sergio Ogo, thank you very much for your perspective. Dr. Otive Eguzo, still on this subject matter, taking a holistic view now, more particularly at the subnational level, what can we do to begin to get more money, more value for the money that we are spending through the budgetary process? There are concerns, for instance, as to who really is in charge of the budget. When governors and local government chairmen, to a lesser extent, are referred to as emperors, almost invariably the implication is that the governor, or some governors, or some chairmen, just regard this as their out-of-pocket expenses. That's the state budget. And the consequence that we face is, looking at the priority areas of spend that you ticked off, infrastructure, education, health, and agriculture, the country is in stasis.
Thank you very much. I think that what we really need to do is to go back to the basics. The basics of how to make plans, policies, and budget deliver services to citizens. So when you have the plan, you have the policy, you have the budget, you must put a delivery mechanism in place. And that is where the bureaucracy comes in. Many people, in my view, have a mistaken notion that we do not have problem with policies. What we have problem with is with implementation. That is not supported by our experience. We don't have problem with plan, we don't have problem with policy. It's not supported by research and our experience. If you look at a state, the smallest state in Nigeria is probably bigger in population than the 50 smallest countries of the world. But most states are run with 3-point agenda, 7-point agenda. No comprehensive state development plan. Just the same way as the federal government. By the way, let me say that Kaduna is not, it's an outlier. Kaduna is exceptional in terms of planning, in terms of budget, and in terms of openness. You can see budgets of Kaduna State, but most state governments, even so, if you meet members of a House of Assembly, they can't give you the budget. So we need to return back to the basics. If you look at, for instance, let's give practical examples. Housing. Nigeria today has a housing deficit of 20 million units. That is, for us to meet our housing requirements today, we need 20 million houses. And if you build 2 million per year, it will take you 10 years to meet that target. And by that 10 years, Nigeria is one of the most fertile countries in the world, growing at about 3 to 3.5%. We will have gotten this thing. But now, what is the housing policy? How many houses are produced every year?
By whom?
Why should you have Ministry of Housing? You know, what I'm saying we have to return back to the basics is that today, government and the bureaucracy have forgotten that the existence of ministries, departments, and agencies is to provide services. So for Ministry of Housing, when you want to do budget, when we do budget today, when you budget to Ministry of Housing 10 billion, if they spend 9 billion, you say 90% performance. What kind of performance is that? The performance of Ministry of Housing should be how many houses are built. Because when I say policy is a problem and people say it's implementation, policy is a big problem. And we have a special problem in Nigeria. That is the problem of our policy makers taking neoliberal policies and going to the extreme in its implementation. At a point, everywhere in the world, there is the concept of social housing. And I need to commend the federal government for returning to social housing, where government build houses. They say, you know, people say that government has no business in business. Government is not effective in things, so the government should not build houses. They should provide an enabling environment for private sector to build houses, and people are mounting it every day. What does that mean? For us in FCT, for instance, God, we are talking about subnational level. FCT is subnational. The greatest problem of FCT, go to anywhere, my work I do is to organize workshop. I ask the question, everywhere I go, what is the greatest problem of FCT? They will chorus it, housing. 1% of the budget is given to FCT every year. But what do we see? When they look at Welcome to Abuja, they see that the thing is not fine again. They will demolish it and build. We all stay in this Abuja. Build another one. What is the budget? Billions. What does it take for government to build house? Government is our private sector. Many of them are parasitic. They don't have capital. Government is the one that has money. If FCT for the past 30 years has been building 1,000 houses every year, we will have solved the problem of housing.
So, Otife, some will also argue that, look, when you say housing is an acute problem in the FCT, that there are houses, but the houses are empty.
Of course.
So, the houses are built by private sector. So, that one, will that one not tell you that to continue on saying private sector should build houses? What is the practical application of that policy? Is that if you are a builder, private developer, you go to FCT, they give you land at very little price, and they give you CFO. Then you go there and demarcate it and sell one plot for 10 million. How will the poor have access to housing? The capital of neoliberalism, United States and UK, up to today, they still have council houses in the UK, whose rent is about 10 to 20% of the... So what I'm saying is that, look, the way budget is structured today and delivered at the federal, state, and local government level cannot deliver services to citizens. That is why we are seeing that with increasing resources from the country, poverty rate, which was 28% in 1980, has gone up. And Nigeria has become the global capital of poverty in the world. If you look at China, look at India, look at Brazil, these countries that have lifted a lot of people out of poverty, what did they do? Plans, policies. I'm deliberately emphasizing policies because the mistaken conception. And that is why some of the good things, this administration has started some good things. For instance, social protection. How did Nigeria overtake China in the number of poor people? China has a population of over 1 billion. Nigeria has a population of less than 200 million. So the population of Nigeria is less than 20% of China. Yet, the number of poor people in Nigeria has overtaken China. I'm trying to say what happened is social protection. And that is why the program of SIP, trader money, empower, giving conditional cash transfer. These are good policies that must be expanded.
All right.
Social housing.
Let's pause you there. We may have to return to you. But what I think is also contestable is the fact that Nigeria is the capital of poverty, if you like. All right. Okay. Let's leave it at that. Now, let's bring in another perspective to this, and I'd like Olani Olele to come in here. Some experts think that corruption and mismanagement are the prime problems of Nigerian budget implementation. And in this connection, a budget is usually deployed to attain the objective of full employment into the economy, price stability, raising growth in national output, balance of payment equilibrium, and of course equity in the income distribution. How has the Nigerian budget, I don't know whether you can remember, perhaps the past budgets starting from 1919, has any budget addressed these very relevant and pertinent matters concerning overall development of the country?
I think during our focus for the executive, we should also look at the other arms of government, which is part of this conversation, which is looking at the budget template for all the arms of government. Okay, now we're focusing on the executive, then nobody is talking about the legislature. And the last time we saw the budget of the National Assembly was in 2017. 2018 budget of the National Assembly was not made public. Even despite several advocacy before we saw the 2017, after 5 years of advocacy campaign, the National Assembly finally made their budget open to the public. 2018 was not made budget to the public, was not available to the public, and we have budgetary allocations in the National Assembly of about 125 billion. But today, there is no implementation report of how this money was spent. Looking at the budget of 2019 and how it has aided corruption, we notice that there are a lot of frivolities and suspicious items in the budget. For instance, in 2017, we got about 500 billion amount in the budget that was unnecessary. For instance, we see over the years, year on, our government has been allocating money for the purchase of computers. Then you come to the question that how many times the government wants to be budgeting when purchase of computers, about 3 million, purchase of scanners. The government budgeting about 300 million for purchase of vehicle, for project vehicle. So we've been seeing these suspicious and frivolous items in the budget. You see the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture where you see something like farming, weeding, projects without location. And this money are always being released to these agencies without any accountability. So we have a platform where we call the tracker, which monitors the project of consistency. We follow up on this project and we make sure that people actually get the value for money. So we have tracker in about 27 states presently that monitors consistency project and they monitor also zone intervention project in this community to make sure that the elected representatives are accountable to the citizen. So we've even seen the situation where we call this House of Representatives or we call these senators out to give account of how they spend the constituency project, and they give you responses like, I have not collected any money, when you know that money has been disbursed to them. So I think the corruption has been very rooted in every arms of government in Nigeria. And how has this affected the life of the citizen? In 2018 budget implementation, we just got the Q3 budget implementation report of 2018, when we are already in 2019. They just released the Q3 budget implementation report, which see that government actually not seeing the revenue where they are supposed to. Government is basically majoring on the oil revenue. Government needs to diversify. Government needs to look at other sectors of government also to provide revenue for it. If you look at the oil revenue alone, government revenue is about 66%. And also, we talk about the capital expenditure because it's not affecting the life of the citizen. Capital expenditure in the 2019 budget is 23%. Our other colleague was saying about over 60%. No, we have capital expenditure about 77%. The non-debt recurrent expenditure is taking about 4 trillion, where the debt servicing is taking 2 trillion. So how do you want this budget to impact on the citizen when the major component of the budget, the 77% of the budget, is used to pay salaries? And in 2019, recurrent expenditure has increased because of the new minimum wage that has increased from 18,000 to 30,000. So about 400 billion has been inserted into the recurrent expenditure of the federal government in 2019. So we need to focus majorly on budgetary allocation and impact on the citizen. The budget is always drafted because of the citizen. The citizen need to see the impact of this budget, because I think most times government play on the ignorance of the citizen when because they know that people don't really ask them questions. You approach a citizen and you ask them if they know the budget in their community, or you know the capital project that was allocated. You'll be shocked to know that most of the citizens don't even know. So.
All right, Olaniyi, data analyst at Budget, would like to thank you for being part of our conversation. We appreciate your contribution so far. We'd like to thank you for being around with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. You joined us from our Lagos Network studios. All right, and now let's go very quickly over to our Kaduna Network Center, and thereafter we'll return to take the many tweets that we have with us. The Kaduna State Commissioner for Budget and Planning, Mohammed Sani Abdullahi, tell us something that, help us understand what probably is going on at the subnational level in terms of using the budget to help improve quality of health, agricultural productivity, and general infrastructure. I'll give you an example. The Honorable Minister of Health was talking about revitalizing primary health care centers, and you ask yourself, at this moment, what is the status of the primary health care centers? That's supposed to be the responsibility of state governments. You also ask yourself, what is it that state governments are doing to drive agriculture? I read the other day that the federal government is planning to establish or facilitate the establishment of cashew processing plants or factories in Benue, Kogi, and Enugu. Is that the business of the federal government? What exactly are state governments doing?
Thank you very much for those comments. I think it is an important question. I do agree with Dr. Ibuzo and the professor who mentioned about the importance of long-term plans, because long-term plans give you a goal to focus on and provide you with the efficiency to target your resources in a way that you wouldn't do if you were doing a 3-year short-term plan. Part of the things that we have done in Kaduna is a 32-year infrastructure plan. Now, what that 32-year plan has allowed us to do is to look deeply at the deficits that we have in terms of infrastructure for health, for water, for education, in terms of transport infrastructure. And when you put these into context, and you see, for example, that given the level of population that we have today, we're approaching 10 million people in Kaduna. The structure of the population is that 70% less than the age of 35. So we have a very young population. We have a number of our population that are school-going age. So the need for schools, primary schools, tertiary education is very, very critical. And when we did the infrastructure deficits for the schools, we discovered that over a 32-year period, we would need to be building at least 300 schools per year to be able to keep up and match up with our population growth rates. Now that changes the conversation completely if you had a short-term 3-year plan. What we calculated over a 32-year period was that Kaduna would require over 60 trillion naira to provide and meet for infrastructure that would put it at par with countries or city-states across the world that are at similar levels of development. Now that changes the conversation because 60 trillion is not resources that we have or assume that we would have in the near future. So it changes the conversation because then we start to look at how do we better utilize public spending? How do we crowd in federal government spending in a way that actually supports us rather than duplicates us with healthcare centers that we've already built in locations that really don't need it? This is why the conversation is important between the tiers of government. How do we leverage on the resources at the local government level to ensure that they are also targeting the resources at the places that matter? How do we make sure that 5 kilometers away in every village that we have, every community, there's a healthcare center, there's a school. How do we ensure that our road infrastructure, our road networks, actually lead to areas of economic development rather than the village of a powerful politician? These are conversations that need to be had and that we have had as part of our plan. Now, when we looked at the financing of it, we saw that public financing would play a role, but it would definitely fall short. And so that is why the private sector, despite some of the skepticism that some of the panelists have identified, still has to come in. We have to be able to provide bankable infrastructure that can be funded by private sector. I mean, the lessons across Africa have not been very rosy. There's not really been a lot of good lessons to learn in terms of provision of roads, for example. The only large-scale private sector funded project in the country is probably the Lekki Expressway, which is also facing some of these difficulties. So we have to look deeply as a nation into how to provide bankable infrastructure, schools, hospitals, water. How do we draw in corporate social responsibility to provide this funding? Because we do have a huge gap. How do you bring in development organizations, the United Nations, the World Bank, ISDB, in a way that you are defining the agenda and in a way that actually supports the growth and development of your people? We have to look very closely at demographic trends. How is our population growing? What part of it? What age range? Because for us to be able to provide services to our people, these are the things that we need to tailor around. So when we look at the federal budget and we see 8.8 trillion, we then come up with a question about function, okay, and responsibilities and mandates. This is something that we need to have, because if you're a minister of agriculture, for example, you own no land. If you're a minister of housing, you still have to come back to the state governments to request for land to build these houses. Is it not better to pull these resources together in a way that makes more sense and you can deliver these projects? So these are conversations that we need to have. The federal government today is taking 54% of national wealth. State governments, 36 of them, are sharing 24%. And the local governments, 774 local governments, are taking 20% of those federal resources. These are conversations that we need to have around the fiscal federalism of these issues. These are things that have been delayed over the last 20, 30 years, and they are things that we need to finally get to. There's documents before the National Assembly which they have not yet looked at regarding these issues. So we really have to have a holistic conversation. I completely agree with the issue of long-term development plans. If you look at China, for example, they're on their 16th development plan, and this shows in the way that they execute projects. The last thing I'll mention is on this delivery and execution of projects. Many times when budgets fail, sometimes it's not even about the revenue paucity. We have to look at the absorptive capacity of our governments, of our ministries, departments, and agencies. Sometimes you would have the entire resources in the bank of that agency, but the procurement process takes 6 months. For example, for a road, you have to advertise, tender, pre-qualify. If you haven't done the design, you have to do the design. So it takes half a year to actually commission a road. By the time you are done, the rains have started. And so
all right, Commissioner for Budget and Planning, Mohammed Sani Abdullahi, we thank you so much for your contribution this morning. It's been quite educative and informative as well. Thank you indeed for reaching us all the way from Kaduna this morning. Of course, Dr. Tive Ibuzo commended Kaduna State for being for openness and transparency in terms of making their budget public. All right, now we are back here again, and we need to look at the tweets. But people have been responding to this conversation, and would like to let you know who were able to reach us this morning. Now, from Sani Michael Omokoji, as he began the studies of nations recently, know that what other nations are doing right, that Nigeria is not doing well. I discovered that Nigeria has the worst budget performance behind Afghanistan, Somalia, and South Sudan. This is a sad development for a nation like Nigeria that is so endowed.
Now, Ahmed Ibrahim Idris tweets, if all our budgets are implemented the way they are supposed to be, Nigeria will move forward. What makes Nigeria remain on the poverty lane is inadequate budget implementation.
Now, Law Alpha, it's gladdening to note that the period of waste and reckless spending is over as far as the present administration is concerned.
Mike Ayakwa tweets, Nigeria is an economist nightmare. policy inconsistencies and somersaults, delay in the passage of budgets and non-implementation of the said budgets, stopgap approach to policy issues. All these have adversely affected the economy and our GDP.
Jack Solomon, while we implore the Buhari-led administration to continue to show more commitment on pursuing macroeconomic policies that will achieve fiscal stability, non-oil sector competitiveness, stable single-digit inflation, increased non-oil revenue, and a competitive exchange rate.
Kira, let's jump to Abdul. Abdul is starting on page 4 of our tweet. Said, I'm not sure most governments at the state and local government levels have a template on spending, not to even speak of prioritizing. They don't even know the importance of budget. They see it as rituals that must be done every year. They lack the knowledge on the application of resources.
Now, Festus Akimbewa, there are many areas where early action is required, especially job creation, because unemployment has reached intolerable levels. Also, government must work hard to collect sufficient tax revenue to cover its regular spending. The rate at which government debt is rising is frightening.
This is coming from Akeju Olagbaju. It says, in view of limited resources, budgets should be based on specific items to attain growth that can make impact.
Well, for want of time, we also had a twist from Omobola Hall,
Mayaki Moshood, Chris Simeon, Abdul Rashid, and Daniel Dugule. Thank you very much for your contributions. It's on that note, we'd like to also thank our guests with us here in the Abuja studios. Professor of Economics, Nazif Dama, University of Abuja, thank you for being with us on the program.
Thank you very much.
We also would like to appreciate Honorable Sergio Sogun, who is a member of the House of Representatives. Thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria. And also deep thanks to Dr. Otive Igbuzo, Executive Director of the African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
All right, so that does it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do have a nice day. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirin Umayo, thanking you for keeping us company up to this moment. Do same again tomorrow for a fresh package of Good Morning Nigeria.